conversation with one of the highest ranking Black women in television news today, Kim Godwin. Kim,
hi.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, Kim is a mother of two. She is a 1984 graduate of Florida A&M.
HBCU power.
Hey. And Kim got her start as an investigative reporter at WPTV television in West Palm Beach, Florida. You are actually on your screen looking at a still shot of Kim from one of her stories.
Yeah, need a new hairdo, but yeah.
How old were you then?
That was 1990. Okay. So I think I was about 25 or 26. I look a little older than my years, I think.
It's a great looking photo. But for everybody, you guys know Kim has had a very long career. She's got about 20 years of experience as a manager. She made that switch. I'm just going to read the litany of things because it's long, and I'll just read probably some of them. Kim was a producer for WTAE in Pittsburgh, executive producer at WNBC television in New York, senior news producer and later assistant news director at WCAU-TV in Philadelphia, news director at WOIO-WUAB in Cleveland, vice president news director at KXAS-TV in Dallas, vice president of news operations for NBC Television, vice president and news director KNBC Television in Los Angeles, acting news director, assistant news director at WCBS Television in New York. She joined CBS Network in 2007 and has served as senior broadcast producer of the CBS Evening News since 2014. She is also the executive director for development and diversity, and now, of course, the vice president of news for CBS News. Phew! Yeah,
that's a lot. And you know what? I'm going to knock on wood, but if it ended today, I've had a great run. I really have. I've just had the time of my life in this business.
You know, you have indeed. And for many of us who are on the air, to make that transition. So we're going to pause for a minute and go back and take a look at one of Kim's first stories when she was an investigative reporter down in Florida, in West Palm Beach. Can we show that one, Benet?
Here we go.
Geraldine Anderson Cantor and her husband Charles are arts and crafts enthusiasts, always busy working on some sort of project. The Cantors also try to encourage their friends and family to stick with a hobby. Last June, they decided to send a good friend in Massachusetts a golf scope to help him with this game. The scope was ordered through the Cone Company of Minneapolis. When the friend had not received his gift a few weeks later, Mrs. Cantor got a little nervous and called the company.
They said it takes a month, so I waited and waited. Then I called back. Well, it still took time. And then they said, no, we delivered in Massachusetts, and they sent me a name that signed for it. And I said, that doesn't sound familiar.
Her friend didn't know who it was either. But then Mrs. Cantor received a notice that the company had never even received her order. Then the company said the order was wrong.
Oh, Lord. So anyhow, I'd been back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until it was 6 months, 8 months. But I got tired of that, and then I called Channel 5. That's when I got results.
That brings back memories.
And you have been delivering results ever since. Do you remember the details of that story? Do you remember how you got
when I saw it, it all came back to me. The name of that unit was called Contact 5, and it became Contact 5 with Kimberly Godwin. And as you might imagine, being in South Florida with that population, the elderly population, it was like I was a superhero or something. All I did was, I had a phone bank of people and producers, and people would call in with problems, and people who ripped off people. And, it happened all the time in South Florida, especially with the elderly, from roofs to driveways. They were taking money all the time. And I would just go out and confront the companies and get the money back. And, it would all be on tape. And it was a fun job, but very, very demanding, too. I was fearless,
How long were you on the air?
I was on the air, I think 5 to 6 years, because I was the Contact 5 reporter, but I was also the morning anchor.
We've got a picture of that, the anchor team. But if you get a chance, if you can flip through that, the still shot from there, if we can, would be good to show that. You were the morning anchor, investigative reporter, 5 or 6 years.
Yes. Yeah. It's funny how I got down there. It's a quick story, but I was just out of college, working behind the scenes at a station in Tallahassee where FAMU is. And I was the only one at the station one day when a big story broke. There was fraud in an election. And I was the only one there. I ran down to the election office, covered the story. It was the lead of the 6 o'clock, again, because I was the only one at the station at the time. I was not a reporter at the time, and just did the story. A news director from West Palm Beach, a guy named John Ray. Remember that name because he comes back in my story later, many years later. But John Ray was the news director, was on vacation in Tallahassee in a hotel room watching the news, called me from that one story and offered me a job on the air in West Palm. So I went down there as a night beat reporter and then transitioned to morning anchor, and then I became the Contact 5 reporter, which was like a station franchise at the time.
So 5 of 6 years, you're on the air there. Why, when, what prompted you to leave, drop the mic, and decide to sit behind the desk and go into management? What happened?
You know, my parents asked me the same thing at the time, like, what? You're an anchor. Why are you, what is a producer anyway? What is this man? You know, they were very, very upset, didn't understand what was going on with that. But there were a couple of things. I mean, I think all of us know internally really what we want to ultimately do. And while I liked being on the air, you know, I enjoyed especially that franchise, Contact 5, and it brought great satisfaction, you know, getting people's money back and sort of being the hero. And then the morning anchor job was fun, you know, informative, you know, very fulfilling in a way. But I wanted to be in the room. I was always looking across the room where decisions were being made, you know, and I didn't like being told all the time what I was going to cover and not being in the discussion about how we were going to cover something or, you know, the angles that we were going to look at. So it was a little bit of that. And it was also, you know, one day I was I was the only person at the station, again, covering a fire. And went out there, and it was a high-rise fire, and I had a live shot, and the water was going up the building and coming straight down on me, and I looked like a wet dog. Like, you know, it's almost like one of those times when I said, you know what, I really need to do something else. Like, I'm not having fun right now. Okay. But it was a bigger thing. It was, you know, me thinking about my skill set, and I think I was just a better producer. I wanted to be in charge of what we were covering and be in on those discussions. And, you know, it was a tough thing because you know, when you're on the air, it is sort of fulfilling and it, you know, for your ego, but I think some people have that chip and others don't. And I didn't quite have that chip. I had the chip for producing. That was more my passion. So
did you start producing at that same station, or so you had the opportunity, they gave you the opportunity right then and there?
Right. Well, here's what I did, because I went to the news director and said, listen, I want to start producing newscasts. I know how to do it. You know, I did it in college. I did it a little while when I first got out. And she looked at me sort of sideways and sort of said, what do you mean? I mean, it was the executive producer. What do you mean? You're our morning anchor. And I said, okay, let me make a deal. I'm going to ask you if I can anchor the morning, and I then want to go and produce the noon show. And then I'll go home and take a nap and come back and do Contact 5. And if I could do Contact 5 2 or 3 times a week, you know, that you all get what you want. I'll anchor the morning, but I want to produce the noon show. And like, you know, that was a crazy schedule. But I knew what I was getting at. They didn't know, but I knew, like, I wanted to transition. So I did that for almost like 6 to 9 months. I can't remember exactly how long I did it, but it was exhausting. I mean, I would produce a noon show 12:30. A lot of 2 or 3 times a week, I would run home, take a nap till like 2:30, and then come back to do a quick interview with Contact 5, or, sometimes I'd go out later in the evening and do Contact 5 and come back and be on the set most of the times at 6 o'clock. So I did that, but my whole goal was to get a tape of producing so I could get back into that. And eventually, when I got enough newscasts, I could do that.
So this was a skill. Producing was something that you had learned at FAMU.
Yeah.
And so you were able to just pick it up, or just kind of go back and put those shows together because you already knew how to do it, and you obviously already knew how to write and how to stack a show. So it was just a matter of learning the what.
Yes. I mean, it really was. And being given that opportunity, I recently talked to Caroline Clark in Black Enterprise magazine just about my career and all of that. And one thing that she made me realize, and it's just something I'd like to share, is I just asked for what I wanted most of the time, and I was willing to work for it, but I just asked for it. And that's what I did. I just went and asked, can I do the noon? And I did get, are you nuts? Like, this is crazy. I said, just let me see if I can do it, because I really want to get back into producing. I'm pretty good at it. I have some ideas for the show and blah, blah, blah. And they let me do it. And I got a tape that was good enough eventually to get, I then sent the tape to Pittsburgh, and that's how I got back into just producing.
Well, let's go back, because I read that. I thought that was a really great article in Black Enterprise, and that stuck with me about just ask, because I think sometimes we simply are too afraid to ask. So is there, you pick the right time, you go in with more than just the ask, but obviously, you said, and this is what I will bring to the table, but I'm also willing to do that. What advice would you give those people who are considering a transition, or just really want to get up the nerve to do what you did and ask for what they want?
You just have to do it. But the big thing is, the ask does have to come with, something to back it up. You have to be willing to, whatever it is, sacrifice, stay late, get in early, work 50 hours, work 20 hours a day, whatever it is, you have to say, I'm willing to do this. And here's how what I bring to the table will help the station, because that's what they're looking for, is like, what is the value that you're going to bring to whatever it is that you're asking for? So you have to be prepared to sell that. And time and time again in my career, I've had to do that. But I go in passionate about myself. So if you really want to do something, you have to really go in and sell them on it, and sort of have things to back up your request. Here's what I would do. Here's how I would approach that. Here's why I need to be in the room. One thing that we don't seem to do is own our story. Everybody has just a unique thing to bring to the editorial process. No one can take that away from you. Your story, whatever it is, it's different from anybody else in the room. And I learned, it took me a while to learn that, because at first you are intimidated when you walk into a room. As my first news director's job was in Cleveland. And I to this day remember the first time I walked into a staff meeting with the department heads, and all of them were white males. And I was like a 32-year-old Black woman, first news director's job. And, my heart was beating, but I like a drum. But I walked in there with a certain confidence, because that confidence doesn't come with, knowing everything or feeling like, oh, I can conquer this. There's always some nervousness and all of that. But it comes from owning my story, knowing that whatever they bring to the table, they can't tell or do what I do. They can't tell the story that I do. They don't know the stories that I know. They don't know the people I know. They don't, you can go on and on and on. It's a life experience that only I can own in that room. And all of us bring that.
Well, there's so many questions that I have, but I want to remind our audience that please, Kim is here. This is your opportunity to ask the questions that you want to ask. Let us know if you are having a problem trying to get your questions on. Just text me. Some of you have my phone number, so do that. Let me know. Let Benet know. So you mentioned that you walk into this room and you're the only Black woman. you have been the only Black woman, or maybe one of two, one of a handful, many, many times. What has it been like as an African-American woman on this management track, dealing with mostly men, period, mostly white men, but mostly men?
Yeah. It's not been easy. Like I said, it took me a while to get to the point where I'm confident, in just my ability. But there's no reason to shy away from your experience. That's the best way I could put it. Your confidence should come from the experience that you walk into that room with, even if it's just your life story, your life experience. You have a right, what a story is, what people are talking about in your community. And that is so valuable to the editorial process. That to me is what diversity is all about. It's about diversity of thought, diversity of life experience, not just ethnicity and color, but so many other things. You mentioned, being a mom. For a long period of my life, I was a single mother. So raising daughters, so school, all the different things that everybody else is dealing with, you bring that to the editorial process, and you have to sort of own that and not be intimidated by their stories, So I went to Florida A&M University. So what if you went to Yale? We're sitting in the same room, and, many times I was a boss. Like, I owned and love, anybody who knows me knows I am like the biggest Florida A&M University, fan in the country. And I own that, because guess what? They can't. HBCUs, that was great. Like, well, Kim, what is FAMU? FAMU. I say you. And now all of them know that. But you just sort of own that story. And I think the intimidation comes when you don't realize the power that you have in that, and how wonderful that is to just own who you are, because no one can take that away. And it's a great story. All of us have just a great story.
Was there a time when you kind of had to put somebody in their place, or that you had to remind lots of them, huh? When you had to remind a man that, whoa, wait a minute, and how'd you handle it?
Many, many times. And you know what? It still happens. It still happens. It really does. And
because I think this is something, I want you to share this, because people who are considering making that transition, it's hard enough being a woman, period, in almost any industry, but you chose the path that's even harder than so many more. So, I think our members need to know this is what they might encounter, so that they are ready for it, they're prepared for it, and know that this is just the way it is, because as you say, it's still happening.
Oh, it's definitely still happening. I've come to realize that a lot of it is about, I say, testosterone and egos, that and women, we're different. So you have to sort of own that power too in a room, right? So guys a lot of times are trying to one-up each other. One talks louder than the other. They tend to talk over some women. You're trying to make a point. They tend to, you say one thing and then they just say it louder, and then all of a sudden the room hears. Like, all those kinds of things tend to happen. And I think you have to just be aware of it, and then pick and choose your fights about it. Because you don't want to always, like, I just said that, or, you know what I mean? Like, you can't do that all of the time. But you do have to not shy away from the power that you have in the room. And again, it all comes to me from experience, start with your life experience. After that, your journalistic experience. You've covered stories just like they have. You've, paid your dues just like they have. You've written for the college newspaper just like they have. All those things that you've worked for put you in that room. So don't be intimidated by whatever their credentials are, because you're in the same room. You have the same kind of opportunity. So you have to just learn to own that. And I think culturally, Dorothy, a lot of times we don't.
Yeah.
You know, we think that if we just sit in a corner and do our work and work hard,
somebody will notice us,
recognize it, or tap you on the, like, that is not going to happen most of the time. You have to stand up and ask for the opportunity, push the opportunity. You know, if you start just with coming in and wanting to produce something or going out on a story or whatever, then you have to come in with the idea and say, hey, I'd like to do this. Or I think this would be a great thing to do, and here's why. And I've already called these people, and I've talked to this person, and boy, the visuals would be this. You've got to sort of sell it, and sell it because you believe in it. And that's what people are really looking for. And that kind of thing sort of puts you on the map. It's not just, you know, I am the manager. It's what you bring to that title that you have, no matter what it is. Today, we had a great piece on CTM, CBS This Morning, on Black history. And it came from an executive assistant here who, you know, anybody who would listen, this young man was going by saying, I have a story idea. I have a pitch. Like, you know, and it was like a 9-page thing. And I said, Sean, I'm not going to read 9 pages. But like, okay, I'm going to whittle it down. But everybody who walked by, every EP who walked by, vice president, like, he was trying to sell the story. And finally, he got it sold on CTM. And it was a question that many of us would think, what? You know, but the question is, when did you first realize you were Black? And CBS News did that story this morning, and it was done so well. You guys have to go look at that story. But I saw it. A young man, like, you know, an assistant who was a couple of years out of college, you know, who most of the days is answering phones, but he's looking for his next opportunity. And that, you know, I've counseled him about owning your story. Like, who would have thought? He thought about that. And Kim, no one else in the room had that question.
The questions are now pouring in.
Okay.
So let me, I'm going to go. I want to make sure we get to as many as possible. Okay. All right. So here's one. And it says, what advice would you give for an on-air reporter who wants to become a producer? And I think you've already touched on that. I mean, So we'll move on. You pretty much touched on that. If you didn't get a chance to hear her answer, then you can go back and watch the recording, but it's basically ask for it. So I'm going to move on to another one that says, why do you think there is such a focus on working in front of the camera?
Because that's where you get recognition, right? I mean, I think all of us just immediately, when you're in college, you love to see yourself on TV. And, you know, it really is a good thing for people of color to look up at the TV and see people who look like them. So I don't want to diminish that either. That's very important. I mean, I think all of us connected with someone who was actually on the air before we connected with anybody behind the scenes, because we didn't know anybody behind the scenes. So it's you know, it's great to have people who are on the air. And if that is your talent and your passion, you should absolutely still pursue that. But we all know that we need more people of color in decision-making roles, and we need people in boardrooms, and we need people in editorial meetings who are determining who goes to cover things, why they go to cover it, how we're going to cover it. You know, those debates are so rich, especially now. I mean, look at the politics in this country. Look at, you know, everything going on. You want to be in that room where those kinds of debates are going on. So, you know, there is a focus being on air, but, you know, realize what's going on behind the scenes. And I'll tell you, it was a CBS trip. It was a CBS producer named Marquita Poole, African-American woman who came to FAMU's for a career day. And I asked her if I could come visit her when I'm from New York. When I came to New York, could I come visit you at work to see what you do? I had no idea. And she said yes. And so when I was in college, I came to a CBS control room and saw Marquita Poole. Now that was very powerful for me, because here was a Black woman who was in a control room, you know, running things as far as I was concerned, picking up phones and, you know, saying, we want that live shot. No, we don't. And I'm like, what is she doing? But I was so fascinated and impressed. Wow. So I got to see behind the scenes too, and see somebody of color. And it was I don't know, maybe a year or two ago, I ran into her at a party. Like we were at the same, and I couldn't believe it. And she didn't remember me,
Oh,
but
wow.
I remembered her.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
it's important that we are there so other people can see that they can do it too.
I want to remind the audience that a little bit later on, Kim is going to talk about those behind-the-scene positions. There are a number of openings at CBS, so if you stay with us, you'll hear about the openings and what you need to do to apply and the skills that you need. All right, moving on to another question. Someone wants to know, after rising up from various markets, was working at the network what you thought it would be, better or worse?
That was good. That's a good one. When I first got here, I didn't know what to do to fill my day. Because after being a news director in local, you guys know, like that's a 24/7 job. And there's a show there's a show every 15 minutes, right? There's a morning show and a noon show and a 4 and a 5 and a 6 and an 11. And as a news director, you're in charge of all of it. Like you never get any sleep. And then on the weekends, they're calling, like it's 24/7 for real, right? So when I first got here, my first job was as a senior producer over the domestic bureaus, so over the United States. And so in the morning, I would talk to the bureaus and we'd talk about what stories we were going to pitch that day and what we were going to do. And usually 2 or 3 of them would be on the show. And then I'd sort of sit there and go, well, okay, now what do I do? This is kind of boring. I'm used to running and a show being on in a few hours. It really took me a while to get into the groove of how the network operates. But I've learned that it's a different kind of thinking because, okay, yeah, you talk about the stories you're going to do that day and all of that. But then I get to really think about, as a senior producer, I really got to think about what should we be doing, a week from now, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, big stories, should we go and sit in a town where something was happening to sort of, get the feel of something that, a decision that was about to be made. Should we 2 days from now go and, it was that kind of future thinking and planning. And, I would like to think that the network quality of stories, because we don't have to run and gun on everything, you can plan and shoot things 2-3 days ahead of time, weeks ahead of time. 60 Minutes works on stories months ahead of time, that, you can put more thought into it and really take your time to find the right people to tell a story better than you can. And, in local, you can't always do that. Something's happening, you got to run down there, whoever's standing there, you grab them and put them on TV, if they know something about something. And at network, there's just a little more luxury to go more in depth. So.
Here's a follow-up to that question. Was there something that surprised you or delighted you?
Yeah, the time, and the quality, I think, of CBS is a network. I call it the little network that could. When we go on big stories, and for a lot of time over the last 4 or 5 years, I traveled with Scott Pelley just about on every big story that he went on. And, you have people who are such experts at their craft, from our camera people to field producers to floor directors. It's just people who are really at the top of their game. And I don't know, they do things that I can't believe how great it looks or how well it's lit or just how versatile they are, and so that sort of surprised me and delighted me that, wow, you get a chance to really make something look beautiful and great and wait for the perfect moment, which you don't always get to do in local. It's just a different.
Okay. This is a question that I was going to ask. I'm so glad someone did, because you mentioned that at one point you were a single mom. How do you balance the work, the personal life? And the question is, what does self-care look like for you? But let's talk about that balance first. How do you do that? And along the way, at what point in your career, and where were you when you were a single mom, but you continued to move and you continued to balance it?
Yeah, I did.
Clearly.
You know why? Because I didn't have a choice. Like, okay, the babies needed shoes. No, but it was a great run. I was divorced when my kids were young. I think 1 and 4 or 2 and 5 or something like that. They were really young. And when and that was before, it was like while I was a news director. So, again, 24/7 shows every 2 hours and 2 babies, basically. And boy, my girls were so great. I would get home and I hired an afternoon nanny. So someone who would pick them up from school and take them home and, cook dinner and make sure they did their homework and all that until I got home at 7 or 8 or whatever time it was. But many times I got home and news would break. I'll never forget in Dallas, tornadoes came, coming toward the town, and I had just gotten home. And my girls, though, were used to it. It's like, get the sleeping bags, honey. They would get their little sleeping bags and get in the car, and they would come to my office. And a lot of times they spent the night sleeping in my office or whatever when they were young. But you just have to take it day by day. And for me, it was about realizing that you can't be Superwoman. You're not going to be I'm not going to be the best mom and the best news director every single day. Some days I'm going to have to give more to work, and some days I'm going to give more to kids. And there was a time in my life where I just said to my coworkers, Saturdays are off limits unless there is a huge story, like things are blowing up all around or whatever. You guys handle that. I am spending Saturdays with my children, focused on them without looking at my phone every 2 minutes or whatever. Now, again, it has to be really huge. Otherwise, you guys handle it. You know how to do it. And so you have to sort of carve out that time. And as my kids grew, they understood and loved the business too. Kids are resilient. If you keep them informed and say, hey, guess what? We're moving again. And they go, where? And my youngest daughter that was part of her show and tell, she was 10 and had lived in 6 different cities, and all the other kids are like, woo, so they use it to their advantage as well. And I was, fortunate enough that by the time I got here to New York, which was 2007, my youngest daughter was in 4th grade. The other one was in 7th grade. And once they got into high school, I just sort of said, you know what, I need to sit here for a moment. I don't want to, they need to stay in one place and establish friends and, roots here. And so, it worked out so that they were able to stay in the same high school and graduate from high school in the same place. We didn't move.
And so in your current position, what are you responsible for?
I am responsible for news gathering globally for CBS News. So gathering news around the nation and the world, which sounds like a really big job. And I guess in concept it is, because I'm over all the news bureaus, the national editor, the foreign editor, the London bureau, every bureau except really, Washington, I work in parallel with them. But basically that's it. I'm in charge of news gathering for CBS. So, it's editorial in that we talk about what stories we want to cover and all that. The shows have EPs, though, that are very well versed in that and know what they want. And my job is to make sure that we are well positioned to cover whatever it is that we need to cover and want to cover, and that we're planning ahead and our budgets are in line and all of that as we cover news around the world. So it's really an exciting opportunity. I just went to London last week. It was really cool. It was the first time at the London bureau. It was wonderful. Oh. Yeah.
So you still travel quite a bit?
Yeah. When necessary. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, before my travel was actually out with Scott, or, as the senior broadcast producer, that's what I did. I actually went with him on big stories that we covered. And I think we're going to show one of them from last year. But and so this is more about going and talking about what we're covering, how we're covering it. Do we have the right resources? In London, we talked about safety issues, our coverage in Afghanistan and Syria. What teams do we have in there to protect our people? How do we prepare them to go to these dangerous places? How do we, if something bad happens, how would we find them? Like all that kind of stuff that goes into this higher level of coverage around the world.
I'm going to do one more question, just so that our audience will know. I'm going to do one more question, and then I'm going to go show the video, talk about the video, talk about some jobs, and then if we have time, I'm going to come back to the questions that you guys are posing. You've got some really fabulous questions here, but hang on. I'm going to try and get to as many as I possibly can. So here's that last one before we move to another segment. Is there anything that you wish you knew when you were in your career at 25?
Is there anything
this is obviously coming from a 25-year-old who wants to know? Give her some tips. What do you wish you knew back then?
You know what? We've talked a little bit about those things, right? I wish I had known back then that I didn't have to be intimidated by who was in the room. I wish I had known back then that my voice counted even back then, you know, that I did not have to defer or to other people in the room. I wish I had known to own my story from the very beginning. And that really is my best advice to young people is to really own your story. But again, you have to be prepared. You know, you cannot just come in with hands on hips. I think we should, you have to know what do your research and pitch stories that are well researched and well-rounded, but don't be afraid to be part of the conversation. Again, as I said, culturally, a lot of times we are taught to just sit and do your work, and maybe somebody will tap you or realize how hard you're working, and that doesn't always work that way. So you walk into editorial meetings, be prepared to talk about something. Be prepared to talk about something that you would love to see us cover, or you would love to see us think about or research or look into or whatever. And that's how you get attention. Good attention is when you're part of the conversation, engaged in the conversation.
We want to take a look at a broadcast. And can you give us a little prep, Benet? Get that ready for us. And we are about to take a look at, where was this? This is Hurricane Matthew?
Yes. And this was last year. The reason I like this story is because it took a lot for us to get there and do it. And I'll just talk a little bit about once you see, we'll just watch like the first 5 minutes about how Scott got where he was and how we decided to cover this in a different way and all the people that it took to get it on the air.
And then, but before we play it, Kim, go down, so just give us a quick overview of all the people that it took, and then we can come back and talk about what each one of them did from what we're seeing. But how many people went down?
I would estimate there were probably about, 15 to 20 people, but knowing that this hurricane was coming and it was getting close, we sent a couple of field producers down to start looking for places that people were evacuating and finding good stories, the right people to tell the stories about the evacuation process. Because remember, it was a huge evacuation process at that point. Basically everybody in South Florida was being brought into shelters and that kind of thing and leaving their home. So we had to send a couple of people down. We sent, 3 or 4 camera people with them to just spread out and try to find great stories. And then I went down with Scott, and we travel with a guy who is basically our logistics guy, who also runs prompter and prints scripts, gets coffee, like he does everything. He's our newsroom coordinator, so we went with him. There were several associate producers that went, and again, everybody is looking for stories, and then camera people went with them. And then we had the whole floor crew. We have a floor director. We had the camera people who actually record for the broadcast, not just out covering stories, but record for the broadcast. They were there. Several what we call digital journalists. I'm sure you guys know MMJs. They were also deployed. I don't know. We had about 5 or 6 of them. And there are certain times during the story that I started thinking about when we were driving into a hurricane, which really was a very dangerous thing. And what made me stop and say, you know what, we're pulling over here. We were trying to make it to Jacksonville, and we ended up having to stop in St. Augustine at the time. I started thinking about what I would tell these young people's mothers if we didn't make it. And that really is what made me say, that's another thing you do as a senior producer on the scene as you make those kinds of calls about how far you will go, where you will go, how you will cover things. And, I made the call, we're pulling over right here and stopping here because it's a little too dangerous. The police had told me that if something happened to you guys, we are not coming. Like, it's too dangerous out there. And that's what made me pull over. But we ended up being the story just was covered really, really well because we were aggressive in some ways. And I'll tell you more when you see it.
Okay. All right. Let's take a look at it, Benet.
A killer off the coast. Powerful Hurricane Matthew approaches the eastern shores of Florida.
You need to leave now. So if you're in an evacuation zone, get out.
Waters are rising. The wind is howling. The rain is coming down. 4 states order evacuations.
I live right by the water, so I'm leaving.
Streets and airports empty out. Shelters are filling up. As the storm that left more than 100 dead in the Caribbean approaches the southeastern United States, forecasters make a dire prediction.
This could be not only a very expensive hurricane, but a very deadly hurricane.
This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley, reporting tonight from West Palm Beach, Florida.
Well, as you can see, the Southeast is threatened tonight by the most powerful hurricane in more than a decade. Matthew is about 100 miles offshore. It's expected to make landfall overnight just north of here on the Space Coast of Florida near Cape Canaveral. It is a huge hurricane, 120 miles wide, and it is strong. Sustained winds up to 140 miles an hour. More than 2 million coastal residents from Florida to the Carolinas.
All right, it's buffering. So let me just talk about what we've seen so far.
Let's pause it for a moment, Benet. Let's pause it. Okay, go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, let's just talk about what we've seen so far. Now, remember, Contact 5 was in West Palm Beach, so I was back in my backyard.
That's right.
So that was a fortunate thing because when we went down there, the advance crews, when I got there, had set up our live shot on the 10th floor of a condo in an enclosed balcony. They were like, oh, Scott will be dry and all of our equipment will be dry, but you'll see, rain in the background. And I said, we're not doing that. We came down to cover a hurricane. We're going to be in the rain. So let's get down, and he's going to stand in the rain, and we need to find a place where the cameras can be dry, but Scott can cover the story and be active in the story. And I went to a building that I knew, that building where Scott was standing. In my head, I'm like, I know a building right there by the water that they could stand behind it, whatever. And it ended up that the guy who owned the building was a good friend of the general manager of the West Palm Beach TV station where I work. So it was like serendipity, one of those things that you go, wow, okay, I connected. And he's like, oh, sure. He basically let CBS take over the first floor of his building. But again, that's being aggressive because when we went on the air, this was a big win for us because when we went on the air versus Lester and versus David, who they were on the balcony in the dry place, and Scott just looked, like what he was, which was covering a hurricane in the rain, so it just looked better and had a better feel. And as you can see, he wasn't afraid to get wet and not, no umbrella and all that. It's just like, here I am. And this is the story. But just that open that you saw, just the open that had, what the show was about to tell you. There was somebody who had to write that open. We have 3 or 4 writers that's all they do is write copy. And we have a head writer, and then he has 2 other writers, sometimes 3, that help him with copy all day. But he had to write that, and then
do they write just for the open, or do they write everything?
He writes the show in general.
Show.
So
okay.
He was back in New York, and there are a team of broadcast associates and production associates that pull that video. They look for video like that all day and sound bites. And so those are jobs for younger people who come in, and that's kind of cool. You sit and look at all the video coming into the broadcast center and pick what you think are the best shots for our open and the best sound and the best, how can we best get people pulled into the show? Those are young people who are doing all those things, and they come into the meeting and say, here's what I have, here's a great sound bite. They work with the writers to put that together. So those are a couple of jobs there.
So when because I got an email from you guys recently, you're looking for broadcast associates, and
yes.
Those are people who would actually be in New York with something like this happening and pulling everything together.
Exactly.
Video.
And
okay.
Broadcast associates also, they pull, a lot of producers send them their tape to log their interviews. And part of logging the interviews is also telling them what's the best part of the interview, picking sound bites, they said something great here or there. And that is all part of training you too to be a better storyteller, because you can hear the questions that the correspondents are asking, their follow-up questions, how they're going about covering a story and that kind of thing. But yeah, broadcast associates do all of that, and they're very important to our process.
So who's on the ground finding the stories between the associate producer and the producer, the MMJs? Are they looking for different kinds of stories, but are they all looking for the same thing, and whoever comes up with it? And how do their jobs differ in a situation like that? Who did what?
Everybody fans out, but there is a little coordination. Like in this instance, I remember there was a producer, Wendy Krantz, who I sent her to the evacuation centers just because she is great at just finding great people and stories. Like people talk to her, and they'll tell her whether they had to pack up their sick mother and had to take the grandfather here, or how many babies they have, or how all that stuff. She'll get that kind of thing. And then we had a MMJ named Galad, who I just wanted out there getting just great pictures and finding the best pictures of the story. He's just a great picture guy. He understands journalism, but he also just shoots great video and knows how to find things like that. So he was down there. And then there was another producer that I sent to look for police officers to find out what they were shutting down, how they were going about their jobs. Were they in neighborhoods knocking on doors and pulling people out? So there's a producer doing that. And then when I got down there, I went straight to West Palm. These producers were like, I'd say about an hour to a 90-minute radius around the story, just hunting and gathering. And of course, I was telling them, okay, Scott, we're 2 hours away, we're 3 hours away. What do you have? What do you have? What do you have? And one of them, Wendy, said, oh, I got a great character at this shelter or whatever. So that's where I sent Scott first, so she had already found people for him. He didn't have to go in there and, listen to 20 stories and pick one. She found a great story. So all he had to do is drive up, walk in to a shelter and talk to somebody, right there. And in the meantime, I took a crew and went out on the beach in Palm Beach and stood on the sand myself. Like I jumped over the wall and stood on sand. And I'll never forget, our coordinator looked at me and said, Kim, why are we out here, in this rain, and, what are you doing? And I said, I never take an anchor or a correspondent somewhere that I have not already been. As a good producer, like you want to know this is where he's going to stand. This is where, and, so yes, we're getting wet now because when Scott comes from that shelter, I want him to come to this beach, and I want to know where he's going to stand, how we're going to do it, so we're not wasting time. That again, we have a deadline at 6:30. Now it's 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So you're keeping all of that in your head. And he's like, oh, okay, that's why you do it. I said, yeah, I don't want to, otherwise we come out here and it's like, oh, where should we do this? Should we go over here? Should we, when Scott gets here, I'll know exactly where I want him to stand. And I've been there myself. So, that kind of job is good.
All right. We've only got about 10 to 12 more minutes, and I want to make sure that we talk about some of the current jobs, current openings at CBS, and maybe you can still tie it into the video, but what are some current openings that you guys have that somebody would end up down in West Palm Beach covering a hurricane or one of the other different kind of stories.
Do we have that list there, or I don't know if Benet has the actual list, but on our website right now, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. There are 16 different openings that we're actively looking for right now, and they run the gamut, so we have on CBS This Morning right now a broadcast marketing associate. That job is a behind-the-scenes job, but it could be very exciting for people who like to speak with affiliates. That job is about marketing what the show is doing to our affiliates around the country. So if we're, for instance, did a story in Arizona today about low teacher pay, we would call all the stations in Arizona and say, CBS This Morning is in your area. When we were shooting the story, here are teases, here's what we're going to do, here's how you could tie in. And it's sort of like tying in our programming to affiliates around the country. That's called a broadcast marketing associate. I would think you would need a couple of years of experience for that. CBS This Morning Saturday, so our Saturday show is looking for an associate producer. And these associate producers here are great. It's a really important job because you do just about everything. You set up stories, you come up with stories, you pitch stories, you go out on stories. A lot of times you do interviews for stories. And many times our associate producers, if they pitch the right thing, they actually produce the story. So it's a great entry into being a network producer, and we need one on CBS This Morning Saturday. CBSN, that's our digital streaming network, needs a digital line producer. So if you're a line producer, producing a 5, 6, 11, whatever show in a smaller market, you might want to do that because it's basically the same thing. You're just doing it on digital, sort of doing a lineup, being in the control room, getting the show on the air when it's live many times during the day. Media manager, you guys know what that is. That's somebody who, manages the content in a show. Where does all the tape go? How do we put it in the library? How can we find it? That kind of thing. CBSN is looking for that as well. We have several camera technician jobs in the Dallas Bureau.
For photographers?
Photographers,
okay.
Yes.
Okay.
The Dallas Bureau, the Newspath LA is looking for a Northeast Bureau in Chicago. We're looking for a camera person where you are, Dorothy. Newspath in DC is looking for camera.
Let me interrupt you, because I've got the list. Terry was kind enough to send me the list, so I know. Let's, for example, Face the Nation, assistant to the anchor. What does that person do?
Now that's a cool job because you do whatever that anchor needs in terms of their editorial preparation, right? So they have a big interview with a congressperson. You would do the research on, how long has that person been in Congress? What is their background? What kinds of questions should they ask? What are the issues before that person? What is the relevance to today's news with that person? So it's sort of like prepping the anchor for whatever it is that they're going to do or for sections of the show.
Is that the kind of job where you can get promoted to another job? Is that,
usually you go from assistant to the anchor to production associate or associate producer, or, it's one of those kinds of jobs where you would, go to associate producer and then maybe to producer after that.
I see another one that I haven't seen before. I've never seen, and that's what I wanted to do. Election and Survey Unit, a coordinator for the Election and Survey Unit.
What's the Election and Survey Unit? Now, we use them a lot. Anytime you see any of the polls, CBS News polls, that's what that is. And so, they have to decide how we're going to gather a poll in the statistically acceptable way, so that it meets all the correct parameters for having a poll be legit. So I don't know, that unit coordinator would probably report to these people and just coordinate, phone calls, what sections of the country should they be polling, keeping up with where we talk to people last, that kind of thing. I would think it's more like an office manager kind of thing. But if you're interested in that, in polling and how we put polls together and how we choose who we poll and, the questions that are asked, that's another thing. We look at each question, and a lot of times that unit talks to the shows and says, here are the questions we expect to ask. Do you have anything more or additional? Or is this getting at what you want to find out in the poll? So I work with them pretty closely in news.
So if you work in the LA Bureau, because this is what the LA Bureau is looking for, I see assignment desk. Is working for the assignment desk in the LA Bureau like working for the assignment desk in West Palm Beach?
Absolutely.
Same sort of job? Okay.
Yes, so, it is.
And what kind of experience? How many years of experience would you say should someone have, obviously, to work in? Is it LA Bureau because you're working for the network, but you're just in the Bureau?
Right.
But it's got to be a little different, isn't it? And what kind of
it's a little different in that, the stakes are a lot higher.
Yeah.
And that, I would say you need probably about 5 years experience on an assignment desk. It's moving network crews around, but for the assignment editor it's all the shows. That's what you have to remember at a network. It's not just like you're working for one station. You have CBS This Morning, which is a big 2-hour, juggernaut in the morning. Then you have CBS Evening News, which in itself, is the show of record for the network. So you have that. Then you have 60 Minutes. You have 48 Hours. You have Sunday Morning. You have CBS Saturday Morning. So it's a lot of shows that you have to service as an assignment editor and juggle. And all of us want, our people to do whatever on that day. So it's just like an assignment editor locally, but the stakes are higher because 60 Minutes needs this and 48 needs that and CBS This Morning needs that, and you have to figure it out.
There are several more, and there are quite a few of them. Newspath, yeah. I like this one with Money Watch. You can be an associate producer, associated with the regional hub. There's another one, the Newspath. But we've only got about 4 minutes left now. Where should people go to get this list? And can they get this on the website, CBS, whatever, .com, or where do they go?
We're going to look that up. But yes, it is available to everybody on the CBS.com, CBSNews.com.
Corporation.
But let me get the exact one. Is it CBS Corporation? CBS Corporation.jobs.
Okay, CBS
Corporation.jobs.
So in the last couple of minutes that we have, the one thing that you want to make sure that our members understand, that they know, just your thoughts as we close, because this is the congratulations again. I mean, this is huge. It is so wonderful to see you there.
No, thank you. I really appreciate. This is a big opportunity for me because when I first started in the business, like many of you, 100% of my effort was in trying to figure out me, trying to figure out what I wanted to do and how I was going to contribute and how I was going to make my mark in the business. And you're worried about that when you're younger, how am I going to get this experience and, what's my next thing and all of that. And you should be concerned about that. But I've been fortunate enough to be in the business for a while. And now, I take seriously my responsibility to hold the door open for others. 50% of my job is what I do, and 50% is making sure that I'm doing something to help other people grow and get opportunities. And that, part of the diversity and development job is that. Again, why I asked for that is because, I didn't think that anybody else at CBS would be more passionate about doing that. So, Dorothy, thank you for the opportunity to just share. And I would say to anybody and everybody, you guys know my email. It's godwink@cbsnews.com. If you don't, I am open to talking with you. If you have a question, if you want to send, I can't look at everybody's reel, all day, but I will, if you have a story you want me to look at or something like that, if you give me a week or so, I really do try to get to those things because it's really important to me to do that. And I just say own your story, own your story and have that feed into your confidence, and work on your competence. Writing is still the most important skill set that we all can have. And we have to realize that and own that and know that and have no excuses for poor writing. Like, you have to just keep working on it, and keep getting better at it.
Kim, thank you. nabjdigital.blog. nabjdigital.blog. That's where you will find the list. I will obviously put it on Facebook. You will probably try to get it out there so you guys will get a list of those jobs. This was fabulous. Thank you so much, Kim, for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. Congratulations again. Benet, are we at the countdown yet? Benet's in the background. All right. I think...
Are we cut off?
I think we're probably going to be cut off. But I have 7:29. What do you have? So give your email again in the last few seconds that we have. You said and your Twitter, so people can follow you. Where can I follow you? What is that? In your Facebook page.
Godwin KS. Wait, I'm still at Godwink 7? Oh, okay, I'm still at Godwink 7. At Godwinks 7. GODWINKS 7 is my Twitter. We were going to change it to my name, so that's why I was looking at my assistant like, did we change it yet? No, so I'm still Godwinks 7. And my email is godwink, GODWINK at cbsnews.com.
All right.
I'm also on Instagram and Facebook, but I'm kidding.
Get all of it. Everything is covered. All right. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right.
Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.